The first item is about Millennial Woes, who is talking about Nick Cotton, talking about him and his allegations against him for sexual impropriety. And that was a few years ago. I've just listened to a video with him explaining what the problem was with those allegations. Why is he talking about it now? I think he's overreacting again. The last time, I think, was 2 years ago. He was also overreacting. So I'm going to quickly sum up what I thought happened. A woman who knew him from the Patriotic Alternative Conference alleged that he had assaulted her. And it never went to court. He was never charged because she never went to the police. So it was all a storm in a teacup. So obviously what he should have done was behave as if nothing happened until the police knocked on the door. That didn't happen. So it was a storm in a teacup. But in the meantime, Mark Collett made a dramatic announcement saying that Millennial Woes would never be invited to any patriotic alternative conference ever again. And in the light of that, obviously he had to say something about that. And I know I speak with 2020 vision and, the benefit of hindsight. But really, what could you do in such a position other than to deny it? Like, allegations can be easily made. We'll see what happens if, it ever gets to court and the woman never even wanted to. You see, this is the lack of a sense of justice that these people have. So allegations are made. So if they're serious, then it should go to the police and then it should go to court. There will be a trial and he will be found guilty or not guilty. And that is the way to deal with it, not make dramatic pronouncements about the guilt or otherwise of somebody. So I'll put myself in this position and imagine that somebody accused me of sexual impropriety. I suppose it's a bit different for women and a bit different for men, but okay, just under the vague heading of sexual impropriety. No, the thing is, it's different because the presumption for men is that they that they initiated the assault or were being sex predators, and women, I suppose that they would be accused of being easy with their favors. So there's immediately a different perception of sexual impropriety when talking about men and women. But generally speaking, if you remember anything about the law, then you would feel that you have the right to be you would have the right to be treated innocent until presumed guilty. this is still officially the position in law, whatever the practicalities of it. So the whole thing could have been avoided by just, not talking about it. And people who have no self-control will keep talking about it. And obviously there will be people who want to talk about it, and you would have to have the self-restraint not to respond to their provocative comments and allegations and the gossip, and this means not being provoked into defending yourself. I know it's easier said than done, but with the benefit of hindsight, you sort of know the game. Somebody makes some snide comment, and you can ignore it. You might feel so angry about it that you respond to it. And this is when you lose control. And when I was younger, there have been, all those things like, oh, don't respond, just don't lower yourself, whatever the provocation was. And when younger, it is true that, you have less control over your emotions, and you do respond to provocation, and you make the situation worse. When looking back with 2020 vision, with the benefit of hindsight, you know that if you had restrained yourself, if you didn't respond, then you could have controlled the situation. And now, today, Nick Cotton, unwashed, posted something snide on Twitter. And Millennial Woes chose to respond to it on Telegram, denying it. I don't know if these men just like being dramatic. They have nothing to say, obviously nothing to talk about. Secular Quranism is not to be discussed, so they have to dredge up old allegations of sexual impropriety and throw mud at each other. I mean, it's just more mudslinging amongst the lost boys of Neverland. So it was only a little tweet by Nick Cotton, and this reminds me of Sally Burko, and she tweeted. Okay, this was what she got into trouble for in a defamation, in a libel action by the late Lord McAlpine, who was alleged to have been a sex predator, I think, a paedophile. It was it was a long time ago, and people were wondering, who it was, and then it turned out to be Lord McAlpine, who was being accused by this obviously crazy man who mistook him for another person. Anyway, Lord McAlpine is dead. It is possible you can defame without consequence a dead person. But anyway, when Sally Berker tweeted this tweet with a funny face, that was held by the judge in this libel action to be libelous. And I thought it was a bit unfair, because it was just a funny face. You can, the funny face could have meant anything, like, well, you don't, if you don't like, Lord McAlpine, you can, well, laugh at his misfortune. It doesn't mean that you think he's guilty or that you are saying he's guilty. You can, there's all kinds of arguments could have been made on Sally Burko's behalf. I don't like her, but I still think it's a bit much to say that a tweet with a funny face was somehow libelous, because you could be gloating at somebody's misfortune without necessarily saying that you thought he was guilty. You might, be such a horrible person that you think somebody being falsely accused of something was something to, be laughing at, which does not mean that you think he's guilty. You're just gloating at his misfortune, whether he is guilty or not. I mean, all kinds of arguments could have been made, but anyway, she was found guilty of libeling Lord McAlpine, and that is how unpredictable these libel actions can be. And we know of another libel action between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard can be. And it seems we haven't heard the end of the story. But its sheer pettiness and malice is something to be wondered at. I wish I could remember now what. I did learn something about husband and wife confidentiality, I think. I could look it up. It's annoying that I can't remember. I have a duty of confidence, it's like patient confidentiality. So and it has some rule about evidence that you can't be used as a witness to testify against your spouse, something like that. Sorry, I've forgotten so much law. Marital communications privilege, also known as the marital privilege. It protects communications privately disclosed between husband and wife. Either spouse may invoke the privilege and prevent the other from testifying about their private marital communications in a civil or criminal matter. Yeah, so you basically can't get a person's spouse to incriminate him or her. I think that's a rule, as I understand it. But yes, husband and wife can be throwing mud at each other and washing their dirty linen in public, which is obviously what Johnny Depp and Amber Heard were doing. So back to the question of defamatory statements. People defame each other the whole time. It's something warned against in the Quran. Don't backbite. I think that some colourful imagery is invoked about eating your what was it? Eating your brother's corpse or something. I can't. What's the expression used? What the Quran says about backbiting. Do not spy or backbite each other. Would one of you years ago. Would you like to eat the flesh of his brother when dead? Yes, that's the colourful imagery being brought up by this Quranic verse. O you who have believed, avoid much negative assumption. Indeed, some assumption is sin. And do not spy or backbite each other. Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his brother when dead? You would detest it, and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is accepting of repentance and merciful. Jews, too, have very strict rules about evil speech or lashon hara. And it's even stricter than, well, you would expect Jewish rules of proper speech to be stricter than that of Gentile speech because, well, they are supposed to be the aristocracy of humanity and subject to more restrictive laws about their behaviour and speech. And I suppose if you are the aristocracy of humanity or just the aristocracy of a nation, you do need to mind your P's and Q's more than a pleb would. Because nobody expects anything of the lower classes. They don't expect good behaviour. But if you're right at the top and running the country, then you would expect to be acting with greater discretion and self-restraint. And so you shouldn't be throwing mud at each other. And certainly not jumping to conclusions and assuming people are guilty when they haven't even been arrested. But these lost boys of Neverland are not by any stretch of the imagination the aristocracy of anything. They lack moral restraint and self-control. And even if they were advised by their elders and betters, they probably wouldn't listen. And that is precisely the problem with so many Westerners. They do not respect their elders. They do not respect each other, and they fight each other like ferrets in a sack because, well, there is the urge to be the top man, and the quickest way people like that would use, the quickest way they would use to raise their position over others is to lower the position of those they are competing against. And telling lies about people will, usually works if believed. Or maybe they, instinctively, if you just mention anyone, they'll all say something bad rather than good, because that is their natural inclination to lower somebody. It's maybe a modus operandi or something. So we can't expect anything of these people who lack self-restraint and lack principle and a sense of justice and discretion about how to treat others. In matters of law, and certainly the criminal law, I think even those who haven't been legally trained ought to know something about it, such as the right to be treated as innocent until found guilty after a fair trial. nationalists don't subscribe to that rule clearly, and they like throwing mud at each other. And why do I mention the Jews? Well, the Jews are supposed to, if they really are the aristocracy of humanity, then they should look after each other, because if they don't hang together, they'll hang apart. They'll hang separately. That's the expression used about members of the aristocracy who really do need to behave with propriety towards each other, so that they don't start fighting each other, because the moment you fight each other, the masses below them will start to attack them too. So that's why it's such a terrible thing, and we hear of scandals in the royal family. And unfortunately, with regard to Parliament, MPs are always fighting each other. They seem to think that we enjoy watching their Punch and Judy show, when really the opposite is the case. We feel hatred and contempt for these people trying to eliminate each other using the cudgels of lockdown. I don't think we are children who want to see a Punch and Judy show, and I don't think children with parents want to see their parents behaving like Punch and Judy. So it's not appreciated. But there are people who like this sort of thing. But anyway, this is just something I thought I'd mention in passing, since it popped up on my screen, about unnecessary responses to insignificant tweets by people who don't particularly like you. Or maybe they don't even not like you, they just casually toss off some defamatory statement without thinking of it, because that's just how they roll. I mean, obviously, the behaviour of these men leave something to be desired, and obviously their behaviour suggests that they can never be successful, because they never learn these rules of restraint that Judaism and Islam would impose on Jews and Muslims if they were taking their religion seriously. So they're not really behaving like grown men, only children who can't restrain their worst instincts to down each other and respond unnecessarily to provocation. And there was another topic I wanted to discuss, which is a tweet. It's all, well, tweets are ephemeral, I know, but and we should be careful. I suppose I should be careful to not spend too much time on Twitter, because one's account could easily be deleted overnight, and all the wisdom of my tweets lost immediately. Or if I bother to write properly, I would have it curated, preserved in a blog or something. But anyway, I found something that Joseph Ford Cotto tweeted of interest, because it is about the American Republic and the United Kingdom. And this is what he says: I find it highly odd that some Americans scoff at the British monarchy. Meanwhile, they believe their own country is on the wrong track. The presidency is an embarrassment. Congress does not represent them. The judiciary is rigged, and so on. Such little self-awareness. Pity. What is one to make of this tweet? Obviously, not all republics will be well governed, and not all kingdoms will be well governed. But Cotto is complaining that Americans are scoffing at the British monarchy. Well, a lot of British people scoff at the monarchy too. I myself in well, a little conflicted. Of course, I have some affection for the royal family, but as an institution, it's just one of those things that you don't think should exist because it's an anachronism, and it doesn't really help the government. But of course, it is a problem of what to do with the British royal family. We don't want to do mean things to them. We don't want to do, what the French and Russian revolutionaries did to their royal family. And I suppose when we are faced with a difficult decision, the instinct is to well sweep it under the carpet. But I think the existence of the British monarchy does have a significant effect on the lives of other white people who are really technically British. And by this I mean Canadians, Australians, and New Zealanders who actually have their own national interest, their own geopolitical interest. Is it in the British national interest to facilitate a movement for independence from, for these former dominions? Well, that's a difficult question. I live in the UK. I identify with Britain. But then a lot of British people. Well, the thing is, do these Canadians, New Zealanders, and Australians identify as British? Do they want to be? Do they want to identify as British? And is it in their interest to identify as British? And I think the role of the monarchy, or the sentimental attachment towards it, and we can't help but be, sentimental about something that's been around for as long as we have been around, longer than, well, our parents, our grandparents. There is a kind of, well, there is a mystique about the of well, the British royal family have a mystique because of the nature of the British Empire. It is, in a way, representative of all the fairy tale portrayals of being royal. You look at the glass carriage. It's Cinderella, isn't it? It's the British royal family is a representation of a living fairy tale. I mean, of course, grown-ups know that it's not really a fairy tale. They are real people, and they have desires, inclinations, and they are not often proper ones. But the continuation of the British monarchy does have an effect on people living in Australia and Canada and New Zealand, and I think they have been lulled into a false sense of security in thinking that they are. Is it a good idea? Is it a good idea if you were a New Zealander to have the same the same values as the British, British values, the ones about, democracy and equality, and I can't remember what it was, but tolerance, all that kind of thing, which I think was wrong in principle. Of course, imagine if the Tudors said, Tudor values are, well, I suppose the Tudors could say, well, Tudor values are, hanging, drawing, quartering, torture as public entertainment, blah blah. But then, it would have ended. Those values would have ended with the end of the Tudor dynasty. But British values cannot be written in stone. I don't think we can. I mean, the only British values that should be written in stone would be whatever the religion of the British have. Because the whole idea of having a religion is to defer to a higher authority that is more powerful than the people who believe in it. That is why divinities have to be immortal, to be different from us mortals who look to divinities for inspiration and protection and that sort of thing. So I want to address this. It's a tweet of non sequiturs. It's not one of it's not an essay. There's no point, making a big fuss of this tweet, which is really thinking aloud. So Cotto is saying, well, the Americans shouldn't laugh at the British because they're not much better off. And I am really trying to digest this because it seems ironic that the Americans, with their constitutional protections of their rights, aren't feeling that much better off than the British, or do they somehow blame the British for something or other? I don't think they can blame the British because they had their revolution, so they can't blame the British the way the Canadians might blame the British for all kinds of things, because they are still the Queen of Canada is Elizabeth, the Queen of Australia is Elizabeth, and the Queen of New Zealand is Elizabeth. So technically, the Australians, Canadians, and New Zealanders can blame Britain for all kinds of bad stuff, but not the Americans, but because they've cut off this connection. And in any case, I think Britain is more under America than the other way around. And so can Britain blame America for all the bad stuff that has happened? After all, it does invade all kinds of countries it loots and pillages at will. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, various places in Africa, Vietnam, Korea. They were the imperial wars of America. The British, of course, collude with it. The national leaders of Britain, do not protect British interests. And this is fundamentally the problem for people in the West who know there's something deeply wrong about the way their country is being run, the way they flout sacred human traditions such as marriage and proper behavior that is universal to all civilizations. The requirement to respect our elders, to marry before we have children, to look after our children properly. All these ideas are gone now, more or less. They are social conservatism, if it exists at all, exists only in the immigrant community, or the Orthodox Jews who are still trying to obey their rules as much as they can in while they marinate in the moral sewage of globo homo. So there's something deeply, troublingly wrong about the rules and people's knowledge of them, and how they behave towards each other and others. There's a sense that Westerners don't really know who they are anymore. And so I feel I'm dealing with people who are suffering from dementia. I guess it's all right. I mean, I'm used to the idea. And I'm sure a lot of people have to deal with their elderly parents who are suffering from dementia and who have forgotten the things that they once taught you, who have no memory of the things that they used to say or do. They've forgotten everything they learned, and something foul and evil has entered their minds, and they're now doing this other thing instead, which is wrong, which is stupid, which is evil, and they can't quite see it or dare not look at its face for too long. But what I found interesting about Kotick's tweet is that the Americans aren't feeling that pleased with themselves. That is because they no longer trust their government because of the question mark of the elections in 2020. There are many things that happen in not just American history, there are lots of things that have happened in British history and other people's history that are not formally acknowledged. It's almost like it's a subliminal memory that is only half acknowledged, that some record of it did happen, but its significance is not fully appreciated, and the historians don't really point it out because there is some reason to keep quiet about it, and because people are keeping quiet about it, nobody will discuss it properly. And if you try to discuss it properly, you will come up against a brick wall, and you have to really work out what it really is. I think I've worked it out. I've even tried to speak to, well, I think I have spoken quite plainly to some Americans about what really is the problem with their country. If only they would read the farewell speech of George Washington, they would know exactly where they have gone wrong and how far they have gone wrong. And perhaps it is part of their condition, their pathology, their dementia that makes it very difficult for them to even pick up that speech and read it properly, or acknowledge that there are certain terrible things that have happened that they are still sweeping under the carpet. So there are people who would rather put a band-aid over the problem of public education than to tackle the bull by its horns. So what I'm saying is really the most important thing for Americans to do is to give up representative democracy. They have to acknowledge that it has gone wrong. But they will be saying, "Oh, it's something else. It's something else. It's not really the corporate America. It's a breakdown of the family." But they march hand in hand. Consumerism causes a breakdown of the family because corporate America wants women in work, and those who want a certain standard of living will continue to make it the norm for women to go to work after they become mothers. So, if they really want to change, the Americans would have to say, we will have to give up our stupid elections and have a one-party state. It's not exactly new. It did happen under the Federalist Party. I think it's 12 or 19 years. I forget how many now, when it was the only party in the country. And it is only when the Americans cease to have these divisive elections they will sort out their public education and what is required to be done to their public education is to entirely change the culture of having single-sex secondary schools. And this, I think, they will find very difficult to do because, it's been part of the culture of America for about a century, hasn't it? American high school, co-ed. Co-ed high schools. The whole idea of the prom king and prom queen and the high school dance and all the horrors that have come across the Atlantic because the British really want to be Americans. The working classes want to be Americans. They think it's easier for them to pretend to be American, therefore, than it is for them to pretend to be middle class and British. But in both America and in Britain, the problem of government is the operation of representative democracy. So they both have to give it up and follow a different set of rules, and then things might get better. So Cotter goes on to say, Americans believe their own country is on the wrong track, even as they scoff at the British monarchy. The presidency is an embarrassment. Well, the British feel that about their prime minister and the track their country is on. Congress does not represent Americans, he says. Well, the British feel exactly the same about Parliament. The judiciary is rigged, and so on. I know many people who think that the courts are rigged. So in this regard, the British and American, the average Briton and American, feel the same level of antipathy towards their ruling classes and probably about the same amount of self-loathing, because there's something deeply troubling about believing. Well, it would be troubling for any child who believed that their parents hate them, and citizens unavoidably think of the government as assuming some kind of parental role. So obviously, republics and kingdoms can fall into bad government. And in theory, they have the ability to correct themselves. But whether they will is another question. There will be many vested interests who don't want things to. Well, they don't want to admit their mistakes. I mean, this is really the fundamental problem of moral corruption. Moral corruption is I would define moral corruption as following one's own inclinations. So you only do what you feel like at the time, and what you feel like today will not be the same as what you feel like tomorrow about the same thing. So there will be no consistency of action, and then you will get bad results. And therefore, wise people of the past have understood that there should be rules, tried and tested rules that keep the group in existence and apart from others. And that there are eternal and universal principles, laws that tend to protect us from ourselves and each other. It's a simple idea, really. But there's a lot of ego in the way of the people who cannot accept truth without denying it, who cannot accept correction who refuse to accept correction because it hurts their ego. And they are all, to a man, nihilists and narcissists who cannot control their emotions. So we will see. If correction is possible. I have been to America a few times. I guess if I come, I'd like to visit all the 50 states. Spend about 50 days. It does sound a bit tiring, doesn't it? Or maybe two days in each state or something. I'd like to see Mount Rushmore. I think of archaeologists of the future. I wonder what they might conclude if they don't have the historical records of CNN and MSNBC, because it will be the fourth estate that will be the chronicler of our times. And I think for this reason we should, for the sake of our own honour, that we don't want future generations to think of us as people who agreed with the liberal media about things, because their record will be the record that future generations will see, will read. And I don't want to be identified with that kind of thinking. I suppose that there were chroniclers of history of previous empires. And I do know that as far back as Roman times, history was always a difficult subject to discuss, because it's so political. Do we tell them the truth, or do we make up a good story about Romulus and Remus and whatever it was? And I suppose history has always been a bit of a compromise, and we need the historical perspective to finally understand what really happened all those decades or centuries ago. I find myself surprised to come to these conclusions that I think will be found to be either radical or revealing about these moments of Western history. I like to think that my history teacher would be proud of me, but I don't know. I've had very interesting conversations with people in the last week or two. Yesterday I was talking to William Brianis about whether Constantine would have used Islam if it had been available. And my view was that, well, if he would have chosen Islam, because it was obviously a much better system than the cooked up Christocrat that he had to cook up. But it's impossible to be sure, of course. I'm just assuming that any Roman emperor would choose the best available guide, and because he would want his empire to have the best possible guide to humanity. So if you're shopping around for a religion, you would choose the best one available. I mean, that's my assumption. I wouldn't want something to keep my people stupid, to make them believe in lies. And anyway, we know that Christianity did not stop Rome from falling, and after its fall, its religion, I suppose, would still exist, because a religion is an idea. It was sold to the barbarian kings of Europe, who knew no better, who obviously would naturally accept the religion of the eternal city, the religion of their former conquerors, because there was nothing else around. And they were too ignorant probably to have heard of Islam. And also once they adopted Christianity, it would be quite difficult to say, well, we're going to have a different religion. Or it was something that could never be discussed. And I'm sure that if if any kingdom had decided to convert to Islam, it would have upset a lot of the surrounding kingdoms, and they would probably invade it or something. But now is the best time, really, because of the global reach of the American empire and the trading blocks that have turned many Western countries to economic zones. The EU is an economic zone, and I know Canadians have complained that their country has been turned into an economic zone and they're not happy about it. And I'm saying it's so obvious that the solution is this book of rules that you have not previously considered, that you have previously rejected as horrible and barbaric and whatever, but it's obviously much better than the New Testament. And America has it has Islamic foundations because there is the White House Quran. So I think American Muslims would, well, I expect them to want their country to adopt Islam as the mainstream religion, to kick out Christianity, which hasn't done them much good. I've mentioned that I've mentioned the judgment of Justice Brewer in 1892 when he had to formally declare that America is a Christian nation, but not really, because America doesn't have an official religion, and it really wasn't a proper answer, and I'm sure it would still be controversial. It would be even more controversial now about whether America is a Christian nation, and how would this be measured? So this is, of course, a question of American identity, and it is in a state of flux at the moment because Westerners don't really quite know who they are. And that is why they don't know what to do, including the men who are no longer certain that they are really men. And if they are no longer certain that they are really men, they won't be doing what men are supposed to do. And this will encourage their enemies who do know what men are supposed to do and who do have men who do what men are supposed to do. But fundamentally, whether we are men or women, we should always rely on truth and logic to solve our problems and avoid them within the confines of our moral system. So I believe that it is easy to to win the argument. I mean, the reason why nobody will talk to me is that they already know I have won the argument, and the reason why they don't want to talk to me is because they don't want to be seen to be losing the argument to me. But Western men are neurotic because they don't quite know what to do with the idea that they're supposed to be Christian or supposed to be Democrats or supposed to be liberals. But I think it's actually very convenient that all these things should crash and burn at the same time. The failure of feminism, or the sort of horror of feminism that has led to intersectionality, which is really what is driving everyone mad, and this signifies the failure of liberalism, and the success of liberalism signified the failure of Christianity, and we know that Christianity is not capable of being reformed after half a millennium of Europeans trying to reform it. So give it up and adopt secular Quranism. It's so easy. Really, so very straightforward.